This is my speech about technofeudalism. It's a sort of interesting concept, so of course I'll get into it in a moment, but just starting off, I mean, it's sort of, what it sounds like techno-feudalism, the old economic idea of feudalism combined with technology. And so, of course, like ordinarily, people, wouldn't think of feudalism when they think of an economic system. Normally, you'll think of, capitalism, communism, and then like socialism, which is, generally a mix between the two. It's practically definitionless at this point. But of course, there's, the forgotten one, which is feudalism. Old medieval sort of economies were, feudalistic. And so I'm, of course, looking into this from the lens of like an economics major. I mean, I enjoy economics. I find it fascinating. I hope other people do too, but, maybe this presentation will make people find it interesting as well. But specifically in this case, I'm looking at the ideas of Yanis Varoufakis, who is a Greek economist and was the finance minister for a period of time. So I'll showcase, of course, exactly, what feudalism is, specifically techno-feudalism, and the whole idea that, we may have moved beyond capitalism, beyond communism, beyond socialism, and reached this sort of almost techno-feudalistic world, which may come more into being in the future. So, of course, just starting off talking about capitalism, economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. Generally, we consider capitalism to be the global system pretty much of most economies. Like, generally things are privately owned. Free trade is just about everywhere. Like, yeah, that's vast majority of economies today, I would say, are pretty much capitalistic. Maybe people can't argue that some are socialist, but you can kind of argue that anything is socialist if you really want to. So, yeah. And so the idea is, we've kind of there's this possibility that we've moved beyond capitalism. Our markets at this point, like, really free if we are going through Amazon to buy absolutely everything, right? There's that kind of concept. And it's possible that, capitalism has, well, mutated to become something worse, which is what I'll talk about later. Next, communism. It's a nice propaganda picture here. But yeah, it's more of a political theory and sort of an economic theory too, talking about, class struggle. And of course, people will argue that, maybe communism is the solution to, the failures of capitalism. And of course, that's, the general idea of Marxist thought is, a critique of capitalism, a critique of the current world, how things are run, and how to make, the classes more equal. I'd say it's, fairly idealistic, and at this point, it's pretty much gone. Like, people might be able to, consider in terms of major economies, people would call China communist, although I would argue that it's, if anything, it's almost like sort of cursed late stage capitalism, where, there's a fusion of both the government and industry kind of working together in an authoritarian manner, which is, I find, rather horrifying, but maybe some people don't. And so, yeah, this idea, are they really communist? And I mean, it's pretty clear, I think, though, that, most of the world has moved beyond this, and communism does not seem to be the solution to future ills either. Although, of course, Marxist thought, as a critique of capitalism, is still extraordinarily useful today. And so, lastly, what I want to get to is feudalism, which is sort of really the interesting thing here. Feudalism, dominant sort of social system in medieval Europe, where, yeah, the nobility held lands from the crown in exchange for military service, and peasants were obliged to, live under, roofs that the lords would provide for them, and labor, and, a share of everything would be given kind of to the king and the lords and the nobility, where basically everyone is sort of forced into a degree of servitude. That sounds horrible, I know, and it is pretty horrible. And so, yeah, it's an ancient system of governance, economic distribution, and that's what some people believe we may be headed towards in the form of techno-feudalism, which, of course, is this idea that, feudalism is sort of returning in the form of technology, right? When you think about massive corporations like Amazon, Apple, corporations that have more money than, an entire country's economy combined, And when you have, organizations such as, for example, we could think about the Russo-Ukraine war, organizations such as that one Russian mercenary group, the Wagner Group, that's pretty much a corporation. And they're having the capabilities of changing an entire war, which is rather horrifying. And of course, there are utterly massive corporations that, can, at this point, through technology, basically control what we see, what we think, and so on. And so, at this degree, I mean, are there any solutions? Because, technology seems to centralize power more and more and more and more. And so it's sort of the question of, do we want power to be in the hands of our tech overlords, or do we want it to be in the hands of governments? And I mean, I personally would argue I'd prefer governments to control, tech algorithms and whatnot. Although, of course, at the moment, I'd say most governments, including the U.S. government, have proved totally irresponsible in the control of technology and caring for society in that way. But yeah, so I mean, yes, things are probably going towards a more feudal society. It's a sort of bizarre repeat of the past almost. But I mean, there's still always the possibility that, through democracy, we could decide to, seize control of tech corporations or whatever, or at least the algorithms running things like TikTok, like YouTube, like Instagram, like Twitter, and maybe make them less predatory, right? Because at the moment, I mean, people are sort of at the whims of something that is essentially a super weapon, right? You could consider it, I would compare it to almost, suppose some people privately invented, nuclear weapons, and the government was just like, this is okay, this is fine, and ignored it. I would argue that that's sort of what's going on here, and it's an entirely justified intervention of the government into the marketplace if they were to try and place limits on, or just pretty much seize control of, with maybe giving some monetary compensation to tech CEOs and whatnot. Just basically seize control of algorithms, which, I hope it would happen. It might, who knows, but yeah, that's pretty much it. It's an interesting idea. Here are all my sources at the end, so yeah, thank you for listening. I hope that was fascinating.